Dhamma yonde ne duje yamon ro yambo yang dhamma zubbe zan riba dang jakso denpa dewa shiba jiden jimba jibo de kalo jiwa lana meba lana mena je dhamma sanje jande bejawa jaja dhuba la jakse mo chudo jak 月我光在光年做这当子，少钱的那公办的不，我年纪点的那就结束，的这个吧就那样子了，那到个我就都走上我，一切叫做世界人不。找不完就得送那给我，公布去年就那样子。先就电报正面大约就先多找完就那样子。对着见到西方送往街，两面求见就那样子。广播突厥接电报，当街见面电报。在那一点叫做些，的些写了样子。大边的桥之我就给人送列住。几多等到就叫我先就就那样子。这天正月朗阳的老爸当了绕头，先给当把烟点点，给对朗阳巷子。六把这样能叫心，给我别送走吧。让给三年要说的，的那上街的吧。干嘛让人忙面当，就忙是安全吧。门上落到真道不，都是就能得到。是那的月堂前人马也，可碰到那全就着的。我当那当七月老主，这边做的着我哟。
Thus I have heard. At one time, the Blessed One was dwelling in the royal domain of Vulture Peak Mountain with a great gathering of monks and a great assembly of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Blessed One was absorbed in the samadhi of the many aspects of phenomena called profound appearance. At the same time, noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva, looking at the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom, saw the five skandhas in their natural emptiness. Then, through the power of the Buddha, Venerable Shariputra said to the noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva, how should a son of the lineage train who wishes to follow the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom? Thus he spoke, and the noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva answered the Venerable Sharadvati Putra with these words. Shariputra, those men and women of the lineage who wish to follow the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom should look at it like this. The five skandhas should be seen purely in their natural emptiness. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form also is not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, recognition, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, like this, all phenomena are emptiness, and having no characteristics, they are unborn and unceasing. They are not impure or pure. They neither decrease nor increase. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no recognition, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no appearance, no sound, no smell, no taste, no sensation, no phenomena. There's no quality of sight and so on until no quality of mind and no quality of mental consciousness. There is no ignorance and no exhaustion of ignorance and so on up to no old age and death and no exhaustion of old age and death. In the same way, there is no suffering, no origin, no ending, and no path. No wisdom, no attainment, and no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, since there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and abide by means of the profound perfection of wisdom. And since their minds have no obscurations, they have no fear. Transcending falsity, they attain nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times have relied upon the perfection of wisdom, and have become true and complete Buddhas of unsurpassable, perfect, and complete enlightenment. Therefore, the mantra of the profound perfection of wisdom, the mantra of insight, the unsurpassed mantra, the unequaled mantra, the mantra which calms all suffering should be known as truth, for it is not deceptive. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is proclaimed. Teata om gate gate paragate parasamgate bodhi soha. Shariputra, this is how a bodhisattva mahasattva should train in the profound perfection of wisdom. Then the Blessed One arose from that samadhi and said to the bodhisattva mahasattva noble Avalokiteshvara that he had spoken well. Well done, O son of the lineage, it is so. O son of the lineage, since it is just so, the profound perfection of wisdom should be practiced just as you have taught, and the Tathagatas will also rejoice. When the Blessed One had said this, the Venerable Sharad Bhattiputra and noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva and the entire gathering, as well as worldly beings, gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, rejoiced and praised the words of the Blessed One.
Lama Dong Gombo Jizun Jambe Yang La Shang Se Lo Kang Ge Lo Zhu Zhi Ni Zhi Zhi Ni Da Na Na Ra Se We Jie Ni De Ge Qi Jian Si Shi Ni Jie Do Ga Le Ban Zi Kang Do Si Bi Zi Ra Ma Ri Mi Dong Dong Ge Qi Zi Mi 老祖跟了不见大自养了主角养的松，周到接着你莫你罗列接着住住最近，马里米塞东根牛过今年君在日着能。天天大街上街道人有的日做就是都有过。就当今年今大略民生将被养老的阿拉伯阿南的阿拉伯南的阿拉伯南的。在天之间，千绕在间，大略的莫名把绕三年，嘎当定觉雄罗多巴耶，若着不变动，若多呀若呀若呀别呀就，修呀修呀妙呀多。朝也了呀，朝也了也就，牛也丢也就也不也丢，松也就也修也多，苗也丢也苗呀我也。多也给我也诺也多也修也诺，就也不也就也就是了也么，多也不也修也诺。就呀就呀个呀个呀咯，就呀就呀就呀就呀呢，就呀多呀错呀别，就呀错呀错呀么咯。所以就业就业就业就业不，哦呀多呀多，也能够着上，面对那个那样，我要也没有也，我的早也那么是不见，大概是我变天天就了。 高真千遍光年皆中天，过诵多觉护主自多数，便所给的喜悦之别故，桃园卓越人王公约颂，马列谢家之间随便多。下界作我的那所我的，多觉千波的心多觉常，就在的罗波当那罗波，边中中边波当阿的香，娘里西罗觉那所我的，上波多面一年当着的。秋天的月的当照边边，西藏高山女年苏年光，了解是边界那所完的，家园月面修建了中当，到我这把这边过中间，三界观中爸爸要塞说。萨摩大月界那所瓦的，西卓当边穷阿的香，嘎当天边面波中的节，念就当西过去松那所，嘎当那么那那所瓦的，当见心的作业中阿波。我到这边，我修结造结，当我天边道波开诸结，要是绝把结那所完的，照做功德那么多结账。康拉冈的千年最终年，桥当天幕公主坐在边，这些那么那那所完的，让家所罗跟那大眼面，街上他把这边永久，在远这边他看在马眼。生在心间那那所完的，叫我更多样当那么当，人民去这边那弄世间，撒当那这有的照做呢，多久强给过。人道也修三界就，多劫穷难那相求不多当年叫做，大月节节节别做难节，到了平切三界诸不修三界就，多劫穷难那相求不多当年叫做节。大月节节节别做难节，到了平切三界诸不修三界，月当所见就能那相求不多当年叫做。大月节节节别做难节，到了平切三界诸不修。哎呀！当然是都是呀啊！我他缺些是缺的啥些个了，他缺些啥也有空，对了，那最近我是参加劳动那也，所说也能机关这些创造没就去，但那我说有时候啥家，阿里也当俺的也没你说的啥呢，俺的日记咱们里电话的日记了，你我说有的人，你朗读有呢，你实际马路不去看的也没有过了。你去去些他年嘛间呢，你新就这个意思。电话看着周步都，东西看着西步都塞得去。你这样去，连着了样，连着哪个电你了样，说机关这就传到没接话去。你手机上就塞到这把连着哪个了拍。你实际连年最为他也比时间刚刚远的电话说，你确实让我这一拖动了，你我那状态电到电把进着，你这个月绕着去这个也的。
So let's begin with by imagining you're being in a certain place where you are able to think of all sentient beings without exceptions in your surrounding, in other words. It's not that we're just thinking of being yourself in our actual place, which is quite confined in our own room, or even the state where we're, which is Minnesota. But rather, one should think of a very vast space or the venue where all sentient beings can be imagined or can be visualized. So with this, then think of that. The reason why we ourselves and all other beings are gathered here is to examine what is to be abandoned and what is to be accomplished. And with this, then one should also, then one shifts one's visualizations by visualizing all the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas in the 10 directions, and then imagining yourself being in their presence.
당가 속에 던져질라니 된다 되면 돈이 가르쳐야 세죠. 근데 가 속에 녀만 소속이 때니 또 거기 된다를 내가 지신 바래 될 하지 니 가르쳐야 세. 대 맞아 좋아로 와. 최정의 지나 로와. 단다 세디기 대치기 단다를 쇼게네 거나 봐도 저도 뭐저 들라 전에 내가 지신 바래 네 대상지 되기도 알아와이나.
So now, why we are being in their presence? For what purpose? So the purpose is to make our life meaningful and purposeful. So when we speak about making one's life meaningful and purposeful, we're not merely talking about one is able to have enough clothing, food, shelter, and so forth. And if this is not the case, then what we are looking for, what is the thing that really makes our life meaningful and purposeful? This kind of question must be asked by ourselves. And so, so we're not, for one's own purpose of food, shelter, clothing, and so forth. We are doing all that at everyday level, right from the morning until until one's retirement at night. We always look for what is needed for oneself materially. So this is the question that we're asking is something that is beyond that.
또 현대 지고라 처바 제비 거 개시생의 제야이나 가시게 소속이 메세드변으로 세리나로 자친처래다 갈래 쇼장에 칸더로 받지네 쇼지 맞는 리사 말에서 삼반으로 때 세디기 마음방 같이 나서나 가르쳐 그래서게 소소소게 지 도반을지 있잖아 근데 내가 지금 리치로 리치는 소속이 파마 붙기 단다 인생나 갈래 저거 가제 마음방 미치잖아 갈래 저거로 아니 던지지 갈래 저거이나 아니 가서게 단다 얘기를 된데 아니 세대에 간제 풍부될 내서 야바 장제 레베 아니 세대 풍부대 도서나 되네 존조버레베 말레베 세대 아니 깨지니 봐 다 세대에 풍부될 내서 야네 되네 조고 말에 아니 저런 제만 로그레서 러베나 아니 저 간제 전에 로그레 아니 가래 땅고에 가도 가 사자 가도 그래서 돼 뭐네 전에 신주 전된 제거에서 저러
So now, ask about that. Are we really being gathered here today to make our life meaningful? Is merely focusing on one's present life, the life that we have at this point. Are we really talking about this? If this is so, then how long will we live? We'll not live more than 100 years. That is quite sure. And if we are all our efforts and hardship that we are enduring, if this is only for this, then why should we do all this? Why should we endure all these hardships and difficulties just for certain period of time. So again, there may be an individual who is putting a lot of efforts for the material gains, just by thinking that if I become a sick or someone, if I'm ill or chronic illnesses, I might have to work very hard at this point to make enough money so that I can support. So there might be people who have this kind of idea and putting in a lot of efforts and so forth. And there are many, and then there are other individuals who might think of their own, children and other close relatives. For this, they might put in a lot of efforts and energies to support them and so forth. Now, so now here we, as a practitioners, what kind of question that we must ask at this point is now, are we really going to live this life, and once this life, the life of existing the life is exhausted, or it is gone, then is there any way that we may have a continuing life or the future life? And this kind of question must be asked and analyzed.
대체 당어도 줄루지 켈린 친절라 제마 근처기 치도월 세나레니 개미나 가서 남비 정네 시디 간제 단도 센들라 사베게 니 레지 제선다네 니 상해기 제선다네 니 제부 상해 거래 생인데 당어도 남비 정네 시나 다래 개미나야 줄루진다 근처 켈린이 제나야 여보 맞잖아 근처 투니 뭐 정거 말해 여보 투니 제나 니 근처 투니 그래서 때 줄루 뭐셔기 따탄 집안에 진도도 다들 개체치제 다 원은 된저이나 세 지워심하지 매와이나 세디 지고는 최제거 민도와이나 근데 아주 세대기 대지생인데 사야통에 그냥 지고기 대지 장지기 신투도 민도 아니 델레 셴바이네 지 삼바시보다 지 메jan라 로랑체다 삼바 자침보 요야도슬라 아니 남비쳐네 출루던 저도 민도 아니 된저이나 아니 마수치 제나 계속 채워야 살아요. 아니 맞잖아. 아니 계속 채워야 살아요. 그래서 되게 가서 인지미지 라마질 된 거예요, 말이. 그래서 신주제네, 따제제네, 내용마데. 또 소소를 계속다가 내지지 영에 진행소나 아니 문에 제나 될 때서 몇장 제시나 계속 되게 저거 야하면서 도와요, 말어.
So if one is believing, if one has certain belief, and the belief that believing in the absolute beings, or believing in supreme beings, or the God, in other words, and then if one engages in a good deeds, you'll be not as a reborn, but one said that you will be taken by the God and in the celestial land. And if you have done something that is opposite of what is the supreme beings or the ultimate being has suggested for you to be done, then you will be taken to the opposite place where you will be enduring tremendous amount of suffering and so forth. So this is a one way of belief systems that people may have it. But another way, in accordance with the Buddhism, in the Buddhist way of understanding of life, is that if whatever one may have done, it's all becomes a cause. If one has done something that is negative, then one will experience a negative result. If one has done something that's positive, and one will experience a positive results and so on. So, so these are all the believers who believes in, who has a who follows the theistic belief system, and there's another group who follows the non-theistic belief systems or the views. So then in between, there's someone who really think of only this life. This life is gone, then everything will be finished. Even if we think of this life only, to make our life, the present life, even you think of this single lifetime, and after this, there's no life or nothing, that you will not go heaven or hell, or you will not, take a rebirth and so forth. But even if one's idea is confined it to this particular life alone, what really makes you more happy? Is this really something that is something that you are able to acquire some clothing, fooding, shelters will make you more happy? Or if you are able to engage in some kind of, meritorious deed, or working for the welfare of others, which one will make us very happy, even if you do not believe in, the theistic system or non-theistic system, if you think of only this. But if you really think very carefully, even if you do not believe in any, just thinking about this life alone, working for the welfare of others from the depth of one's heart and a resolute intention, with the resolute intention, will really make us, gives us happiness that is pure.
다 텔레 타 녀와지 신주 정이나 소게 시 신도대 강부 찬도에다 소게 주본디는 아니 신도에 님베들 문다이 치바 가렌도 세데레 베나 시 신도지 강부 찬도에나 신도대에는 중앙시 일레가 문제는 취야 취야만 줘야 일레가 문제 용농이 야 로메도 요데 신도의 강부 찬도 대나 이 가서 주고 코로나 아니 차야만 농이 차야만 로랭이 간제 취야만 로네기 제메투비가라 신도에 지고지 레베스는 대니 신주제 아니 신도 대다에는 아니 치바 가려야래서 깨지시 아니 신도도 menda와지 영문에 지응이들라 지 아좀 남비존의 시비 시바생이지 요거야나 아니 이 시바데 가는 용으로 하만에 가용으로 심마 가도으로서 신주 제비가라 뭐네 돈에게 지 로데르지 마제는 메딩이 지게 뭐네 지가사 된서의 진행네 아니 이체의 진행에서 그렇다 된서 가버려 이체의 진행네 아니 신이 뭐네 당하롱 로데르지 마제는 지사마레스는 이 소화대 레비가라 아니 나도 지바게니 시제용수 줘버데 아니 몽번의 로그나 아니 강에면서 지대 대화에서 진로에 된다라 님네 터너지 여사의 생기지 당아서 이체로 지레로잖아 대대소대는 메디 세대 차고 렌델의 이제잖아 아니 맞아기 델레 터지 지자와 렌델의 이체지 대바생에 대해서나 대대소대는 메디 문에게 세대 차고 단다 점을린디다.
So now one may ask a question by saying that, is this quite similar? The tree outside on the street, when there's no enough supply of water, winds, and so forth, the trees will definitely dry, and it will no longer alive. The life of the tree is already gone. Similarly, we as a sentient beings, let's take it, think of in this context as oneself, as a human beings. When we pass away, suddenly it is due to the lack of oxygen, lack of blood supply, and lack of, and then failing of all our body systems and elements and so forth. And we die, and we are unable to, we will no longer alive. So the life will become lifeless. So comparing these two, are we become lifeless like a tree that has already been dried up by not having enough supports or the supplies of the elements. And so one compare this to, is it something that is like a tree, it dries, and then there will be there's no other trees continuing from that particular trees, continuum of this particular trees. So one should examine oneself and comparing oneself with the tree. And if one is able to think of, well, there's a difference between oneself and the tree, is because that we possess what is called consciousness, which tree doesn't have this kind of consciousness at all. If one convinces oneself to have a possessing consciousness within oneself, then how this consciousness coming into being? Is this consciousness coming into being from nowhere? Or the consciousness has its own cause? Or consciousness is coming into being without any causes and conditions? And if this consciousness, where it will go after this life? Will it just exhaust by itself and it will completely stop its existence, or cease its existence, or it will still continue to keep on going life after life after life? So when you examine very carefully, then you'll be able to find that there is a certain, consciousness, what we call, either one should call this as a consciousness or something that is more than this physical body, which carries our life from one life to another life. And when we think about this, then one should think of, is there any way that we can really, make this continuity of this consciousness, when it actually transcends from this life to another life, will be able to make this better? How do we make this better? Is there any method and skillful means to be able to have a better life in one's future life and so forth? So with this kind of analysis will really give us to understand, or have a conviction in our, in law of cause and effect and the continuity of our consciousness. If one is able to have a pure conviction in law of cause and effect, then what we call is one is able to establish the root of excellence and happiness.
다 가서 던지게 지마 지지 시에토에 돼 나서라도 이 차진의 나고 다 지마 지지 생에게네 다른 가서 거수 봐봐야네 다자게 땜바네서데 먼저 저제자 이놈에 봐도네 라마노 되네 되네 저 심만도고를 심만네 심만 되네니 오늘 수신데 람마노 아치를 더투아이나 타바다 탄지심에 고모 타거리에 송에게 아니 땜바도 디지선로메게 집에 담바나 아니 랑게 되잖아 같으니라 오늘 소소라 세와 투지 쳔베 이게 끊내노네 아니 랑메 바타나 가서게 되도 패데 예지체 아니 거기에 나다 간다고 되게 메시비 마리베 오게네 메데진데 동해 녀다 녀신바 가세기 동해 맨다나 데이도 가가 나가 슈시기 가가 떨어지는 도능이 아니 냥답에 선전되다라 아니 대린 라마노 되게지 패도 예산에 선전을 메비 니제다 아니 저와를 메비 대반이 그 때스지 요토에 된다라 그러면 지스지 메바 정해다.
So now we, as the followers of the teachings of the Buddha, okay, we follow the instructions, or in other words, the peace instruction that's given by the great beings in the past, beginning from Buddha Shakyamuni all the way to one's root guru, or the one's root teacher, who actually taught us unmistaken, who actually showed us unmistaken path. And we become followers of those, teaches the footsteps of those great beings of the past. So with this in one's mind, one should then visualize in the space before oneself all the Buddhas and who is surrounded by the great lineage gurus, and in their presence you think of yourself who is surrounded by all other sentient beings who have a similar wish to achieve happiness and overcome sufferings. Although they have a genuine wish to achieve happiness and overcome sufferings, they are unable to engage due to their ignorance, they are unable to engage in the actions which enables them to achieve happiness and overcome sufferings. So with this kind of visualizations, and one generates a faith, or the genuine faith and conviction in the great beings or the three jewels, and then cultivating a compassion and extending that compassion towards all other sentient beings. With this too, faith in object of refuge and compassion towards all other sentient beings, keeping in these two in one's mind, will take a couple of minutes to meditate.
아, 던지. 근데 계속 시비 가라. 소화를 진단 보지래. 근데 선전을 지 대받지만 선전을 니지 장지. 근데 야월을 미비 대받상지 별로 나오지 지 대수지 저로 저와이나. 오늘 쓰나 세매버지 사거든. 인자는 내가 계속 계속 시비 되게 야 소화를 너무 중요로 지는 저거로.
So if one is able to focus on this with intense feelings, in other words, a very honest feelings within oneself, in other words, then really enables one to accumulate immeasurable merits and virtue. So it is for this, we're trying to ask ourselves all these questions, comparing oneself with the lifeless, trees and all, and to be able to have this intense, feelings.
뭐야, 방금 로긴다. 당만서 된저 경험 치바지는 컨센버시에 주는 상조랑저는 바지. 사지원도 전에 자이 사지 제지. 주고 전부 때문에 법이 쳐와지. 당말을 규바지비시 추지 쳐와지. 쳐와니 donde 추는 이시 제다샤와. 당방 먼저 하마 제다 주의시 바스. 되지 소샤르시.
So with this motivations, the teachings that we are listening today is to the great deities on the stages of the path to enlightenment. To begin with these teachings, as always, one should always follow this the important outlines, the four major outlines in the beginning, which is the greatness of the authors, the greatness of the authors given in order to show the teachings as a novel source, and showing the greatness of the teachings in order to engender respect for the teachings, and how to listen to the teachings in which both teaching and the teacher or the authors are great, and that sequence in which the disciples are to be taught the actual instructions.
아니 담박문 전 하마 제때 저기 좀 발라니 랑치 자와 신이 땜비 치다 땜내로 제다 정이 좀 봐서네 저런 뭐 지기 사지 뭐 장위도 거는 뭐 내가 제거가 손이지 now so that see 대셔 되지요. 봐 초아체 동데 이제도 문제요 소바. 아니 동부 가르쳐 버서는 개개 때네 네 간도 버서 라임비가라 지 소문에 내가 제신 받아 오지 송요를 소바.
So then the fourth outlines, which is the sequence in which the disciples are to be taught the actual instructions, as the two subdivisions or the outlines, in other words, and which is how to, after relying on the teachers, here relying on the teachers is the root of one's path, and how the students then turn their mind to after having relied on the teachers, and just by listening to these outlines or reading these outlines really gives us as a kind of feeling that you are actually you have everything is that arranged that you're actually ready to embark on the spiritual path. It just gives you a clear instructions where one can embark on this path unmistakably.
단독 단님 때는 지다자인 레발라 니치 대이 때는 니볼린 비시 교와다 니보 제단린 비시 니치 도문리 다 니보 제단린 비시는 니 랑치 나자는 니보 제단 니볼린 생모치 도문리 니볼린 생모는 송 주부 충분다 통모에 랑치를 반영선은 주부 제다도 주부 첨비 랑치를 반영선은 지치 도문리 도문리리 다 주부 첨비 랑치를 반영선은 지를 송 대신은 주부고 세제 코나된 선대 제다 집이 수 선제나 쇼바를 주의지 도문리리 또 선제나 쇼바를 지를 송 선제는 로바로고 비전세 로바레레와레 로베 선제 문주바 로바로베 많이 셰바지 도문리리 또 로바로베 많이 셰발니 쇼바절은 대바치 못절로 때 제바도 도제 대바로 제지 또 동보로 송 상선이 넘버 한대장 장네 제세지 넘버 송소네 제달림 비주지 또 도문이리 또 손에 제달림 비절니 강로로 비제 텔로 비림바 말에 텔로 받는데 텔로 비림바지 다 텔로 비림바라니 쇼바절로 제다 제바도 파세 타마니로 제지 도문이 나 파세 타마니로 제라 주 신앙하던 편시바 네 대니가 강급이 말에 대니 땡엔 제게 되지 대마 신앙하던 여럽도 여와 대니가 강급이 제세 장에 봐 고랭에 봐 소소라 지지 더 도무 나데 더 소소라 지내니 신앙하던 라동라 지지 도무지 더 라동라 지내니 송 라동라 급이 제세 네 말에 라동지 편시바 라동 강비 라동 주비 제지 말 라동지做点吧다 동벌 라동 做点吧你 장대도스 녀대저 서로 거송아 루주주 공반집에 취재다 정아 아니 동반이제 따와대라 배봐지 다 동반이제 또 동반이제 따와대라 배봐니 대코나니는 주비를 봐 대코나니 대라 배봐 뭐다 동반이 대코나니 대라 배봐 뭐라서 가장 먼저 대 다른 관계 루시바 시바텔라 때는 따와질라 제세지 동보라 가장 먼저 그 베제세 가장 먼저 베진로 가바라노 샤바지 다 동보 가장 먼저 베진로 가바 생긴다네 가자 쳐쳐와 가바 존재와 가바 니는 아니 그 다다 거스 보고 가자 쳐쳐와 가바지 당아도 거스 보고 가야서는 동반이 이제 tawa tumbani tobe ki haton jile chebe rembano ne tombo tawa jile chebala gaja ngonzin bogores ani tanda bana ani tanda lu de se goro ngombo lu ye umi tawa tenla bebe kola ani gasha teda te kade kade ngonzin ge chongwa res ki kola ke shewa.
So we are on the chapter of the special insight, and the particular chapter that we are discussing at this point is identification of object of negations, because in order for one to have a correct view of emptiness in accordance with the Nagarjuna, one should first identify the object of negations, what is to be negated, and how do we establish, having negated that object of negation, how do we establish in the place of that negation?
되지. 딱 어떻게 내가 두개 가르쳐서는 취노지 내루 타투버든 가서 미신에 코바레서 버와 미시 병원에 코아코아세데 가르 미시 바르잖아 취노지 내루 미시 바레스 오나 취노지 내루 가르레 있는 가서 가르 미신에 가 노데여레서 라와이나 아니 단다 이종도스라 손예제 버와.
So the question that we asked is that why we are revolving within cyclic existence, why one is unable to go beyond this cycle of law, cycle of existence, or the samsara. It is because that we are unable to ascertain this ultimate nature of reality, the reality of how things really are, and that is what our discussions is mainly on how do we really, come to understand the ultimate nature of reality or the reality of phenomena and self.
되지. 딱 맞아 가생게 내가 같은 데서나 아니 변화 치기도 치치 변화 로지 변화 동반이 또 로티게 아니 주기 때문에 내로 또 비깔 토마 간데 또 그래. 세 개체 될래도 가세.
So now we are here, that we are discussing in here now is that the basis and attributes that relied upon this basis, right? That's what we are talking about. For instance, take it for example, take it a form as a basis, and think about ultimate existence of this basis. How do we establish ultimate existence of this base, ultimate existence of the form within the form, taking that form as a basis of the ultimate object of ultimate object of the form itself?
되지. 맞게 또 돼버려. 변화 주 생인데 치질래자. 아니 주 메타바도 주 다음에 주 동화 생인데 주이 내로되자. 변화 주이 내로 맞다. 치치래자. 변화 주 지시잖아. 주의 치질래자. 주이 내로데 주이 치치래스. 치게데 치치. 아니 단단 가족에 아니 주 동반이 또 비게 로텔라 이제세네자. 아니 주이 내로텔라 유세네자. 이다 이제
So now the basis and attributes that rely upon this basis, for instance, like a form, the form being a basis, and the impermanence of the form and non-inherent existence of the form is the attributes. So this is how we should distinguish between basis and attributes of that particular basis.
다때든 거대버시나 된대래. 당가서도 이제 변화 이제 주기 내루도비 이제서 도보거나 토망가서기 주기 내루도비 거라 아니 주기 내루도 수니된 제바 된다 된전 제바 세네리 간지 된지기마도 변화 토마 된데서 그래. 변화 유기 이제 도비 거라 아니 이다 이제 니바 다다 가서기 수기 내루도비다 수니보데 아니 빼데 다와까마 타버세네리 아니 빼데 장식 시도여레서 단다이걸.
So at this moment, our way of understanding of the ultimate nature of the form and the form as our understanding is based on dualism. In other words, our dualistic understanding. We have a dualistic understanding of form and the attributes of form, which is the ultimate nature of the form.
된저기 주기 땡게 내루 토마 통비 거라 내루도 주니 된 제네여비 소리지마도 내루 잠바데 통투고 말해.
So in the beginning, the way when we think about the attributes of the form and the form, which is the form and the ultimate nature of the form, we would the way for our in the beginning of the initial stage, the way we look at it, the way we understand the form and ultimate nature of the form is as if the ultimate nature of the form and the form are mingled. It is kind of mixture, the mixture of attribute and the basis of that attributes.
Dele tesi shu chere tombe kala nga so wama chu ne subo taba segre ro chu wama chi chu hang go ro chi wama ma lu so na ene wama de chu ma subo taba chi de kala ne lu dele tesi shu chere tombe kala ene lo tombe ge lo de ne lu no zubi so chi.
So when one continue to practice to focus one's mind on the ultimate nature of that ultimate nature of the form, then when it's one's understanding of focusing on ultimate nature of reality, the form develops or improves. In other words, when it takes some kind of improvement, then that ultimate nature of the mind itself, which understands the ultimate nature of the form, as if that when you pour a milk into the water, the milk actually penetrates into the water and become the mixture of the water. So this is the milk become a mixture with the waters. This is how one's understanding of emptiness or ultimate nature reality become.
Te kala lo ra bare ni lo xian da ye kin zo ye yu de je tu chu wo de kan sa kono ye de je chu wo de den de ge yo ma chu ne su ba ta ba de la nya ja yu jun ba sha de kala ni chu le chi ja chi de cha we kala yi de yu je yi me ja ne kono zu gi de dong ba ni de mi de tang ji xi yun bi kala ni kono ma zo ne na ji na kha dong ba so de ji ko na ma do yi de yi je gi jang che ge chong na yo ma de ge ge ma de ni lu je ma tong yu wo de de kala kan sa kono ye
So then, when one engages in such practice of a long period of time, when such understanding of one's understanding of ultimate nature of reality, of the mind that understand or the consciousness that understand ultimate nature of reality, become matured, fully matured, then one's focus is completely or single-pointedly upon the ultimate nature itself. And for this, one's ultimate nature of reality in one's mind become a non-dual. When such development take place, and such individual has to have become a noble beings or the Arya beings, when such individual, in other words, ascertain the direct realization, when achieve the direct realization of emptiness.
돈이 또 비지 쉐바마도가 속이 단단히 안보기 때 내가 제세에 대해서 배때 거 가도 그래. 그런 타치도 이지 쉐베게 아니 돈이 또 비로코는 짱바이 몰래 되도 거래.
So when such development of mind take place, then for that individual whose focus is only on emptiness, there's no other phenomenon that appears to that individuals. In other words, there's such sense consciousness are all exist in a dormant manner. In the dormant manner. So only the mental consciousness, which becomes so active and completely or single-pointedly focusing on the ultimate nature of reality. So then for such individual whose main focal object is emptiness, so therefore, and the form or so forth will not actually appears to the individual. However, it is not to say that for such individual, the form is not existed.
돈이 또 내루기 세차기 전에 계시시나 가서 다다 용수 줘봐 치세네 치자기랑 거 나고래 내루 통모도 계셔시네 통화도 미바 계셔싱이나
So if you were to think about now the clarity of emptiness, of understanding of clarity of emptiness, for us at this point, the emptiness is something that is hiding somewhere in darkness.
미기 수 통화나 이게 이지 셰바에 이 내루 통비가라 아니 가자 파바 차도 오시
So when the emptiness becomes so clear, just as we look at certain object on the table by our eye consciousness, which we have very clearly with our naked eyes, without involvement of any other mediations, when one's mind is able to have such understanding of emptiness, then the individual become Arya beings or the noble beings.
뭐야 대체 다들 연구비 내지 돈의 제거를 시대만이세도 연구비 내지 장리만도 대출루게 따와도 공부 지제 말이야.
So this is how we actually search of how we actually search at two truths of ultimate and conventional truths. When we speak about conventional truth and ultimate truth, searching of conventional is not something that is a religious matter. It is a fact, the fact that existence and something that we must understand.
안 되지. 대 유술로 가지 되지라마도 추 용수 좀 봐라. 시장 용수 좀 봐. 다 내루문에 또 그걸라 나서게 뭐셔데 라니 된지기 랑문에 주바지 셴바체네 아니 되게 차단게 레사는 걸로 되는 제거를送了 근데 이 맞아 빼서는送비 걸라 이제 라바지 건 빼자네 인텔 버리 강비가 냐네 제비 걸라 아니 라니 다든지 지 넘버데 10이 돈에 아니 냐네를 잡으러
Although we have often find in the text when we talk about emptiness and the basis of emptiness, we always set the example of the form, pillar, vase, and so forth. But when it comes to actual practice of emptiness, it is said it's more effective rather than focusing on an external object, rather one should focus on oneself, how the self is the self or I that we always cherish and considering this as something that's very precious. Does it really exist intrinsically or something that exists as it appears to one's own self?
네, 당연히 맞대서로 다 뒤서들 해서 네, 간다 된다 덴바 가자 니라 소비 조바 넘버 7바 잠 잠라 민조바 화셀라 소바 다 인루 도비 로 마츠비 유더 장원도 주비 취지 차와데 차와 당 대다 여바 녀바네 상미 된 도비 따와 인바 되지 선전는지 강라 다니스 신비 시相当于圈的呢 장심에버 또바네 양답에 따위 고산되어바네 테바 최종의 소로 통치의 쇼로도 줘봐 인데 선제 통치 코와침비 자와 다든지바 도고반에 되라 대 다든지비 시대 장심 매버 또베 대메도바 대당 제메지 최진시 되버여바 또베 다든 zemba doban debi shero dene pena shasho na ju me jindo yoba zone trade donye wanjibi donye doba la shasho to ju chungze jang maju bonya do zonye jinzi de medoge nonsho na shindo yodo wanya do zonma tang de jinzi tang 동해 대도 번조로 시에서왔던 체버지요 민나모 어서도 뭐 대버 같이 대버지래 같이 가당치
Let's read the text, just page 200 in the last paragraph. It says things like, 201, sorry, beginning from the first paragraph. So some in the parentheses, the Tibetans do not posit ultimate truth as sheer elimination of the elaboration of the object of negation, c.g. the two selves. Instead, they hold that as the object of your mind that non-mistakenly knows how things exist, how things exist. The ultimate appears to exist and under its own power, just as things such as blue and yellow appears to an ordinary mind. Ascertaining that it does not exist in that way is a view that knows the profound. They also claim that it is a misstep with regard to the correct view to regard external and internal phenomena, the basis which regard to which living beings cling to the two selves as lacking intrinsic existence. So this assertion stands outside the sphere of all scriptures, Anyana and Mahayana. They accept that it is necessary to stop that conception of self, the root that binds all living beings in cyclic existence. They then assert that that you do not stop the conception of self by realizing that there is no intrinsic existence in the substrata it apprehends as a self. Rather, you stop it by knowing as a truly existence some other unrelated phenomena. This is no different from the following the scenarios. Suppose that there is no snake in the east, but someone think that there is, and it is terrified. So you say to that the distressed person, you cannot stop your idea that there is a snake by thinking there's no snake at all. Rather, you should think there is a tree in the west. So this will stop your idea that there is a snake and will end your distress. Hence, you who wish to good for yourself should stay far away from such wrong views.
Oh yeah, come on.
Let's take a 10 minutes break here.
단지 간속에 로이린 세대에 가르쳐 거잖아. 다 가자 디간라 배나 가자 라신 주바 생인데 까나 아니 타니데 연주 투 말에서네 같이 되게 되버시 바로. 그래서 가자 라신 주바 마카와이나 아니 젠땡에 라신 주바 젠 까비까라 라신 주바 마카와이나 아니 배나 샤쇼는 주일라신 지바체비 까라 아니 대매버차라 샤쇼는 주매버지 토네 매버 시비도네 주기 집에 가거마도 네 노쇼네 심매버 제셀라나 네 샤쇼지 주기 집에 가투고 말에세 베이톤 대송.
Now, when we negate the intrinsic nature, we should negate the intrinsic nature that actually appears to us in our day-to-day, in our day-to-day mind, in other words. When you are one is grasping onto the things that intrinsically existence, and that when we talk about negating the object of negation, we are supposed to negate that intrinsicness, not something else. Because when we grasp, or when you grasp, we grasp onto the intrinsic nature, and when it comes to the negating that object of negation, if you look for something else, then you will not be able to find, you're not able to negate what is to be negated. Just like the example that is set forth in the text itself. When you think that when you have a fear of having a snake in the east, you should understand that east doesn't have, there's no such snake in the east. And that very understanding of non-existence of the snake in the east will reduce or will eradicate the fear the fear of having a snake in the east. It will not eradicate by saying that, well, your snake, having a snake, the fear of snake will not eradicate that. You will say there's a trees in the north or the west, which will not, eradicate the fear of snake.
가서 엄마 탄지기 따와랑질래 제발로 랑신래 매바 또바데 엄마 탄지기 따와랑질래 제기 과사레서나 이름 뭐 거에 개체를러나 아니 개바체 중에 소로 탄지기 싫어던 저거래 마도 아니 우미 따와도에 나도 조금 말이야 소도 아가는 지다.
Therefore it says, if one follows, when someone says that, well, if you think in this way, or if you think of following the Madhyamaka Prasangika's view, your understanding of view will take a very long time. If one think in that way, then one is actually distancing oneself from the teachings of the both Hinayana and Mahayana.
맞소게 내가 가르쳐 거잖아. 대 단달로도 되게 추 간제지나 코로나인 거네 저 장신 거네 맞주가 이나 저때 탄예된 조투고 말해서야 돼. 단데도 같이 되는데 봐라. 엄마 탄제로라 장신지 맞주나 탄예도 매고 말해서야 돼. 엄마 탄제 자이지고로 자이 대하고.
So this, in other words, that it is very important to understand here. Now, the opponents are, stubbornly saying that if something that doesn't exist intrinsically, and it should not exist, that is their core belief, their core standpoint. That is what the other says, opponents. If something that doesn't exist intrinsically, then it should not be existent. There shouldn't be any existence. That is opponents' belief, standpoint. Whereas our own standpoint, in accordance with the Madhyamaka Prasangika, when we speak about non-existent, lack of intrinsic existence, doesn't mean that a lack of existence at all. That is not what we were talking about. In other words, we're not equaling non-intrinsic existence and in non-existence are not the same. That is what we need to understand.
디세트는 좀 배색하잖아요. 시베에서 지발에 엄마 탄지기 다게 시베가라. 아니 뭐 전에 대두바 저단전에 대방계에서는 저런 뭐지 소베가라. 뭐 슈크로기 뭐 뭐이거나 코로 두고요나. 아니 그 때리지 되고 말이야. 저단전에 되고 말이야. 아니 저단전에 되 친치지 뭔지 줘봤던 겨울에서 괜히 게다 하고.
So just as we find in the praise to dependent origination, but Lama Tsongkhapa, where it says, if something that exists by its own nature, then it is contradictory to that such things dependent upon its own causes and conditions. If something that is dependent upon its own causes and conditions, then it is contradictory to say that such things exist by its own side.
디치. 다 디오들에 되게 하자는 거진도 왔다. 대단해서 다 레슨 되어 다겠네. 손도. 된다고데 장례인데 빵네. 코와 친시주 규바 탕치지 자와 마리 빈진당 순진비 턱년비 턱년비 된지 소로당 탑사래 년비 된지 소로당 대유된 전도 장대 미롱왕에 바틴 수바시비 리비 초 자체와 세와 손비 파벌루도야 세지 용라 때네 진비 아마리 시비 장소 파르던 조와 지시 손도 된 러자 되질로셔로 지다데 그것도 야고 질로로 지다
Now here in this paragraph is almost like an advice by Lama Tsongkhapa, which is, hence, you who wish to good for yourself should stay far away from such wrong views. You should work on the method for eradicating the way that ignorance apprehends things. This ignorance being the root of all that binds you and degrades you in the cyclic existence. Regarding this method, the text of, cyclic existence, yeah, up to this one.
되지. 맞아, 다시 스리는 다 레스면 된게 시지미하러. 버진이 밀런 친절라 소소 지보지 용문나 사는 게 저저러. 아니 다 레스 진정이나 아니 다다 사시지 조버 생에데 아니 여러 생에데 렌트 방세데래. 카투시나.
So in other words, what this paragraph, the paragraph that we read actually suggests, it suggests us by saying that if you wish the good for yourself, should stay far away from such wrong views. Is that, who will not wish the good for ourselves, but good for yourself, good for ourselves. There's no individual, not even a single individual, who doesn't wish good for themselves or herself or himself. So therefore, if we are good, wish to good for yourself, you should then far away from this such wrong views. That is what it meant.
진짜 가르쳐는 규바탕지 렌트 차고르세 들어와. 근데 거기 자와기 규바로 와서 강에 강가로 규바세 걸어. 아니 규바탕지 렌트 조고야나. 아니 동해 규바 코 용하게 자와데 가르쳐나. 아니 마리바데레스 마리바사나 라시지 주반진. 아니 라시 메바 마통이기 마리바레스. 아니 디겐 진타데 메보조베 텐달라. 아니 고몰루두게 아니 자체와 소원게 아니 존델라 토선 시진데 제네 아니 강정에나 아니 거의 장서 파르데 싱그레스 로투바 지시에 송도.
So therefore it says, that if one is able to have a right view, we'll then distance ourselves from all those misfortunes. In other words, sufferings, because the root of suffering is ignorance. Ignorance referring to seeing things things exist as it appears to ourselves. Things exist in and of itself. And so when one is able to gain such understanding of how things really exist, we'll then distance ourselves from those misfortunes, and then eventually be able to cross the oceans of the samsaric existence to the other shores, referring to the liberation.
아야. 맞아 되게 저번에 세거로 맞아 이게 신주던의 정에는 저런 뭐 지금 오미 따와 때라 베베 거라 아니 자존 루두에 쓰지만 또 정신다 진짜 장거만에 정신다 세거라 맞아요네 대 저런 뭐 진짜다 배 관심이 좀 베베 거라 오미게 따와 예 선을 오미 따와 깨다 치셔대 아니 지선한다와도 아무 오모 번이 되래도 이나야 뒤기 대석이 송이 라미 송레서는 치치 장 말이 영수 줘봐대 아니 루주기에 세지 좀 맞도 진네 코도음도 되게 양 원래 전에 맞춰는 맞는데 자차로도 하나 배제 세 통보 대강 로서메이 소리지 아니 루주기에 따와기 니에여베게 뒤쳐대 되는 일을 세고도 오미 따와니 비뒤쳐
Here is Lama Tsongkhapa. Whenever he talks about and he just preaches about the reality, ultimate nature of reality or emptiness, it's always based on following the great Indian masters such as Nagarjuna's, the father and son. There's no any other teachers that he would quote it for that. If you look at the Lama Tsongkhapa's quotations, for instance, if you look at this text itself, regarding the method, the text of the father, right? Father and the noble the noble Nagarjuna and his spiritual son Aradhya were clearly set forth vast collections of argument and build up deep and sudden knowledge of the definitive scriptures, how it is that the meaning of the age of the definitive scriptures, how the meaning of these scriptures cannot be otherwise interpreted, relying on this text by Nagarjuna and Naradeva, cross the other side of the ocean of cyclic existence.
Mune chena, ane lama uma bata jise renda wala so bata da chango we son ji yore na. Karsan te kola kono ye gei shenye ta yena mena re. Da tusu yani chi chi chang ma re sen, chang ma re se che, tene kong te, se te ma re da ke she yo ma re. Te kola mo che wa te rangji pi tawa ma do, uma tanji ki tawa te jiro ma tiong ma yinba yinba ki. Ne kowa tene lengar.
So although uh, the Lama Tsongkhapa has relied upon teachers, the Madhyamaka teachers, the main two teachers with the Lama Umapa and Venerable or the Jetsun Rendawa are the two main teachers who actually taught him, who received, Lama Tsongkhapa received the Madhyamaka teachings from these two. If you look at the text, but he will never quote, we will not see any quotation by those two masters, but his quotation of this ultimate nature of reality is always based on the great Indian masters such as Nagarjuna and so forth. That doesn't mean that Lama Tsongkhapa and Jetsun Rendawa has no perfect view on emptiness. That is what is not really mean at all. But when Lama Tsongkhapa comes to wants to quote some quotations, when you will always find the quotation of great Nagarjunas and his spiritual sons.
Dice. Te pe kanche jola pe ti tanda pa do tanjo wa da ranchi pa se na ni kasa ngaso ne ga kasa wa jipi ye ko ton chi ma do ta wa la chara ya ma re se nge tanda ngaso pe kanche jo chulu kan ne tanda ya da ri. Dan oma tanje ge ta wa de timo ma yin be ta wa de la pe me de pe che jero mo che na yin pe che chung pe kanche jo la chue ma re se na de ge de re. Kasa ne te ti ko la je zen ya da wa da je oma pa ni omi ta wa ni ya re se na ko ta che ni na ro de kini ga ne min chung yu me do lo ji to ne.
So it clearly shows that most of the great the masters of the Tibet at that time, they are unable to distinguish between the object of negation of the Madhyamaka Prasanjika and object of negation of Madhyamaka Swatantika. So they are unable to make a distinguish between the two. But Lama Tsongkhapa is the person who make a clear distinctions between the object of negation of Madhyamaka Prasanjika and Madhyamaka Swatantikas. Although at that time, Jetsun Rendawa and Lama Umabas are said to be the most well-known the Madhyamaka master, but when it comes to distinguishing the negation object to be negated, and the Lama Tsongkhapa's way of establishing object of negation of these two philosophical tenets are differs.
Nāngā tā ngā tsō ōmi ngō jiru mō chī ōmi tāwa dīnyē nā tīrī kō mānyē pī kō tāndā lā nāma ōma pā tī jitsēn jāmbē yā tā ngā tsō mā tā mē yī nā yī yī kā tsō tū tī yā ngī rē tō wā tōmbō tīndrī shī kō lī lē nā yāng tāndā ōmi tāwa tā tū pā tī pā tī tāwa chā pā kī jē lā mā tō tāwa dīnyē tū kū mā rī sē nā ōma jiru mō chī kā sā jitsēn jāmbē yā rāng kī ōma pā lā sōng bā kī lō jī tō wā jiru mō chī lā yā mā.
So, although at that time the Lama Umapa is said to be having a vivid vision of Manjushri at that time, and it is through Lama Umapa, Lama Tsongkhapa had a vision, the vivid vision of Manjushri, and when the Manjushri advises Lama Tsongkhapa what kind of text that is he needs to be studied in order for him to gain a correct realization of emptiness in accordance with the middle way. So Lama Manjushri has suggested Lama Tsongkhapa to see, read or study the text by the great Indian master of Chandakriti.
그래. 또 가서도 전화를 지라. 예전 잡아야 되고 제로 전화도 오메다와 나서니 그래서 근데 지금 가서 전화해라. 된저면도 아니 다 샤텔을 패 아니 사장된 제비토네 아니 지전 받은 더 저비존을 토선 제시서네 아니 제네 샤텔을 패는 오메다와 니 받았어요. 소로.
So, but for us, when we have a vivid vision of Manjushri, then we will certainly think that, well, I have gained the perfect view of emptiness. We will claim that for sure. But Lama Tsongkhapa's case, although Lama Tsongkhapa has numerous visions and of Manjushri, but even after having a vivid vision of Manjushri, he then has to go to a retreat for a long period of time, engaging in all kinds of practices such as accumulation and purifications, and going through the extensive studies of the great Indian masters of Nagarjuna, particularly the Chandrakritis and so forth, then able to gain the realization of emptiness.
당가 속에 자식들을 밑에는 터상적지 전에 지 강조지 전에 수지 제가 메디컬라 손나스케면도 아마도 된저기 내가 집에 가라 아니 상제장인 저번 비다 빨리 되대 현대 만다왔던 여러 송도 지 시인 조선던들라 디 오메 따와 예비게 공다에는 될래지나 전에 아니 상제장인 저번 비다 빨리다 아니 오거네자데 예지나 전에 아니 다원이 빌로지도 그래서 지금 와서 봤다나 지 고물로 지고 리사를 상인데 지 사마로 냥래 제비콜라 고지 찔리 저 면은 저 노도지 더 인사로
So here, Lama Tsongkhapa has gone through extensive studies of the great Indian masters, texts written by the great Indian masters, such as Chandrakriti and so forth. And then it is to say that at one night, the Lama Tsongkhapa has a dream of someone called Buddhapalita has given the text and receiving the text and having a dream of receiving the text, and then he's having received the text, he was just placing the text on his crown of his head. And the next day, when he opened the Buddhapalita's text, and then it was to say that he was able to gain the correct realization of emptiness in accordance with the Nagarjuna and his spiritual son.
저런 거 저기 소면된 거 볼루두기 오미게 정도서 맞서 메도 꾸민다기 세나기 메도 꾸민다세데 카시와라 아니 나가도 샤부도 아니 메도 꾸민다기 세텔라 아니 빠된다와기 아니 가르레 다와디 샤네 아니 라민 체제 통 다기에 소터세데 아니 오메타와니 세트 소마로 루두종루 켄데 제메친비 진호제 아니 가사 메토 꾸민다기 진코 용서조바제 메토 주메치미 소라 칼라 토메제 탄제니기 메바세 빠덴다일레 샤트세디 제단 빠덴다와 잡ati 아니 나와를 빼자네 메토 꾸민 세데자 아니 진코 용서제바데 제로모치 코노리기 오메 따와도비기 로레 자유디 로이 노마니 도비 진코 용서제바데 아니 빠덴다와 잡아당 곰블루주기 텐라테네 네 mal me so de to so ero da gi jing ye so to se de ni ka le shu kha bi ko le so to ji do.
So it is therefore, if you look at the praise to divine origination by Lama Tsongkhapa, he has set the example of the Kumuda flower. Kumuda flower, the example that's Kumuda flower is actually the actual text of the six six categories of the reasoning by the Nagarjuna and so forth. And that the Kumuda is said to be the blossom of Kumuda only happened when the light of the moon shines directly on it. Otherwise, it will always close. The Kumuda will always look as a bud of the flower. It's not actually blossoming. The blossom will happen when only the light of the moon, reflects all moon actually directly shines on that kumunda, which will open. So therefore, the Lama Tsongkhapa stated when I said, the explanation or the commentary of the Chandrakritis as the light of the moon. And that very light of the moon opens the Kumunda flower, which is the actual text of the Nagarjuna. So with this, Lama Tsongkhapa stated that by following those texts and studying those texts, that which opens the thoughts of Nagarjuna by the commentary of the Chandrakriti, and I finally be able to ease my mind, relax my mind. That is what Lama Tsongkhapa said.
아니, 대저게 아니 지 대반도 지다 당당도 지다 지 센의 조화도 지 편에 아니 대달레스 데비 다게 세데 공부를 주지 좀라 아니 다네 니 바르던 도 제쇼세 연 취디지 양스지 전에 소소 대반의 지 정해나 고 바차 수청 수지자도로.
So with this, kind of feelings within us, we should think of all those, the verses that we find in. It's a very, very precious verse. It really enables us to have generate an irreversible faith in the teachings of the Nagarjunas and his spiritual sons, and having a pure faith in them. So with this kind of faith, then it's as it's mentioned in the text itself. Then Lam Rim said by saying, relying on the text by Nagarjuna, they will cross the other side of the ocean of cyclic existence. This will really happen.
다 타면 된다도 가자를 로동고 버대다네 오미 따와니에 고사 쥐어발라 신의 내체와 인베 쪼듯이 봐 이노서도 디강이 신루가 버대 송거에 제세.
So then now it says, to avoid missteps in reaching the Madhyamak's view, it is most crucial to refute wrong ideas about the object of negation. For that reason, I've given an extended explanations. The text itself says.
아마도 고사세디 고도 계셔로 이런 보고도 고사. 아니 때문에 보zoala 아니 내가 전부 수의진 있어 송도.
So to avoid missteps, the missteps is something that refers to taking a long time. That is what is meant by missteps.
대체 또 손바랑로 때려 다 내가 때려 손바랑로 지 가장 먼저만 손은지 뭐지 대 가장 먼저만 대다 현라 좀 뭐지 취당 가자라 대단지 체바 좀 뭐지 뭐좀 뭐지 봐오 동번에 저 가자라 나지 가자당 리피 가자니요도 동번에 오탈레서.
So now we're on the chapter 17, the actual object to be negated. Okay, so here, how our system identifies the object of negation. This has three parts. The actual identification of the object to be negated, and when to add qualification to other objects of negations, and whether to add the qualifications ultimate to the object of negations. So with regard to the actual identification of the object to be negated, in general, it says, with regard to object of negation, there are objects negated by the path and object negated by the reasons. As to the first, this matches the separation of middle from the extreme says.
대체 너네 된 단지 더 내려래 너네 저는 가자 트듯이 그 주문도 알랑지 가자 리뷰 가자니 카투 송샤나 근데 징에 되래도 하다 아니 대 제생 가려서나 아니 대로 오메 따와 생인데 느리지를 세우래 느리지 세우래서 템바 디 주선 넘어기 나비 존치콜은 계시시어이는 주타마 시대 라라기 따와데 타토비 오메 따와 인생은 손바로와 아니 덴주기 차네 얘는 가서 강사라는 데바다제 변에 센서베 따와데 오미 따와 타투바데 레센은 대성진 건지 대도아이나 아니 가자지 대성지 주해제 되나 고사 대성지 제투고 말어와 덴주기 제바이 돈에 니 카투 de omitawa gaja de isen malawa che ani jotama na ha ri de ba de range yung go ya de ya nyanga de yin jiro.
So where in the text where it says the regarding the general regard to, in general, the regard to the object of negation, there are objects negated by the path and object negated by the reason. So there are two objects to be negated, right? The reason why Lama Tsongkhapa has said there's two object of negation is because now, if you look at the text of any text of the four philosophical, the four tenets, in other words, Vaivashika, Sutantrika, Mainoli, and Madhyamaka, the middle way. So all of them actually claim as their view is the middle way. Vaivashika, it's claim its own way, view is the middle way. Similarly, Sutantrika and all of them, which we claim as the middle way. So now, if someone says that is the middle way, if you rely on that, if you think and rely on that as a middle way, then we're actually, in other words, we're actually, following the mid-steps to reach the Madhyamaka's view. So therefore, Lama Tsongkhapa is clearly distinguish between the object of negations. What is object of negated by the reason, object of negated by the path. This is for this reason, to understand object of negation in accordance with the Madhyamaka Prasankika.
This is yung suge 고할련 소기 고할련 동이 찬이시나 텐데 차라기 랑기 림바체네 용조 지로와 텐데 차라기 림바 임베 아니 로이 또베 따츠지 텐데 생인데 엄마 타지에 봐도 이신을 해 봐라 마도 제 미네 이신이 아니 텐데 차라기 타네 아니 좋다 뭐 랑랑게 아니 따와기 저 손을 해 용조 지로와 계산 마서네 렌지
All their views of those four philosophical tenets emerges from their understanding of the dependent originations, their way of understanding of dependent originations, and the subtleties of dependent originations. Because the Madhyamaka Prasangikas, in other words, the Madhyamaka Prasankika's way of understanding of dependent origination is mere imputed by conceptions and term and name. That is the subtlemost way of understanding dependent originations.
다 동보 이탈리아에서도 내가 저기다 가샤텔 랑지 가샤데 리피 가샤세제 근데 랑지 가샤 생인데 여래에서 근데 리피 가샤 생인데 여 말에서 그래 동보 랑지 가샤 생인데 가서 시디데 뉴디도 뭐셔데 근데 랑지 가샤 아니 리피 가샤세디 지파 되기 제제네 아니 조타반데 지라 아니 가르사 리피 가샤라 용시
So now here when we talk about the object to be negated by object negated by the path and object negated by the reasons, object negated by the path, object of negation of the path, it exists. That negation is actually exist. Object that is being negated exists because object negated by the path is the affective obscurations and cognitive obscurations. Those two are the object that is negated by the path. Whereas object of reason negated by the reason doesn't exist at all. It is intrinsic nature, intrinsic existence, which is to be negated by the object of reason.
당가준들이 랑지 가졌을 랑세나 빼나 랑가주 디지시는 초란에 사지 사기 랑바들라 랑아세그라 아니 내 랑한테 랑질이나 가제트 까급이 쳐봐요 말이 가서 가제트 마가 랑한테 랑질 메체비 쳐봐요 말이 수수조도서 강가 이질 랑여레 초란 정하가 랑여레다 시디데 니디니가를 여러 인사디 가제스디 던데 리피 가제이나 피게데 까마차나 디기로쇼데 랑질레 체그 말이
So if one is unable to negate object of reason, then one is unable to attain the path that actually takes us to the advanced state of Burmese all the way to the state of enlightenment. As we know that there are 5 different paths, starting from the path of accumulation to a part of normal learning and so forth. But those paths will not be accomplished without negating the object that is to be negated, object of negated by reason. Sorry.
Tele kodewa shenandere. Pena lanji gaja sena, pena masu chupa nepa dewa chike shena, chupa nebi jen shena, kanru sebo tongu ya na, chupa yin nasa dewa tele kasa lanji gaja deja. Chupa nasa degi jen shena, kanru sebo tongu ki, kanru sebo dewa te, ripi gaja le ja kore.
So let's take an example of someone who is between the object to be negated by path and object to be negated by the reason. For instance, in someone who is suffering from jaundice, and such individuals, the mountains, the white mountains, appears to such individuals as a yellow mountains. Now, the jaundice is set as the example of the objects negated by the path. That sickness, jaundice exist. However, the appearance of the yellow mountains is analogous to the of negated object of negation, object to be negated by the reasons. Such yellow mountain doesn't exist. However, the jaundice exists. It is due to the jaundice, sickness of the jaundice, such individuals have a yellow appearance of the mountains.
Tela tombo ne utale sondo ta lanji gasha de karere sena nyomo mbai jiba dang shiji jiba ni de denje dene jiba tangje de dese pa ne jowan de je somba ta nyomo ba dang shiji jiba ni so dene shija tangje la yebi gasha yin de mena lijen tata meme de jowan joro sondo de.
So the Macher's separation of the middle form, like Sim says, there are teachings on reflective obscurations and on cognitive obscurations, and hold that all obscurations are among these. And when they are gone, you are free. Thus, there are afflictive obscurations and cognitive obscurations. This object of negation do occur among object of knowledge, among knowledge of knowledge. For if they did not exist, then all embodied beings would escape cyclic existence without assertions. As for the object negated by the reason, Nagarjuna's refutation of objection says. So, what is meant by obscurations? It is something that obscures us, or it's something that interferes us for something to know.
세힌 리바세오로 아니 코로나시 세힌 리바이나 가리 지디오레세소나 시지 지바도 뇨무비 지바이 셰자 통지 미기 따와나 예지 마통에데 아니 지바니 지디오레 까디오레 예스.
So here now, if we take the the definition of consciousness, or it is definition of our awareness, which is clear knowing. And that very clear knowing is obscured by those obscurations. Without negating those obscurations, such as obscuration to path and obscuration to reason, and one's clear knowing will be obstructed.
견주기 랑신 유에스와 세나리 랑신 유에스와 데 시자 당지 세보면 통해데 리바니기 뭐 통해기 리바니 강해지면은 아니 루아선리는 매번 통해 작으로 왔지.
So because we call the our mind, nature of our mind is luminous. So, but the luminosity of the mind is obscured by those two obscurations. Otherwise, it's as it's mentioned in the text itself. So, for if they did not exist, then all embodied beings would escape cyclic existence without assertion.
대체 nga song rangxin neri ye se de tere 강에 de mewa ina rangxin ji nga so sanje rangxin se yo chulu ka de sanje rangxin se sanje ye ba me la de se ji do de ge ngo ji do tere rangxin ye se yo de ji pa de rangxin ji shu mewa yin san ko ye se bi ge nang ba tong ye se ne na tong ro ona ye se wa de mo tong ba su chen de yo se na ne ji ba ni ji ka de re se ne ji ba ni se wa la kar che go se na ta de Japan de Japan Bangun Chene, and the Ribu Gaza the Cup, and they launch it about the Pangure.
So then it says like that we all commonly accept that there is always existence of the Buddha nature within all of us, right? Buddha nature is within all of us, which is the pure nature of our mind. And so for this, for some other Tibetan Buddhist tradition would say it is the Buddha already within us. Because although that Buddha is already within us, we are unable to recognize that Buddha that is existing within us, which is always present in us. We're not knowing that. But now what is happening here is now, although that such a clear nature mind is within us, why this clear nature mind is unable to know that how things really are? It is because two obscurations we talked about earlier, obscurations to be obscurations two obscurations and two obscurations, the afflictive obscurations and cognitive obscurations. And this afflictive obscuration and cognitive obscuration, which is the object to be negated by the path, must be eliminated or negated by identifying the object of negation of reason, the object of negation of reasons. Without negating object of negation of the reasoning, that's not possible for one to achieve those path, the spiritual path, which takes oneself all the way from the path of accumulation to the state of enlightenment. So therefore, identification of object of negation is something that is very important, so that can let that luminous mind manifest.
Demena Licha Tata Bimit and Joro, see the Quatin Rich. The repeat Gajan Zundo Les and Yana Kachi Chubai, Peme, Lane, Peme, Yang, Lonzin, Jonga, Chubai, Goje, Dene, Teta Yin, Shebi, Rangele, Dene, Mariana, Chubu Kachi, Chubi, Peme, Ranjin, Tomba Yin La, Tamba Peme, Peme, 도냥 또 로반 zemba 저로 대시를 대 로반 zemba 대된 대자제발라 대제시방 대제시비 년도지 주바시 주바 대이 로반 zemba 된 도바셰도 대제도 나이 치동바 주바 다보 뭐보 탕제라 라심 멤버 동바사 주비 페메당 자와 Tala Ranshin Yoban Zimba Kanyi Baten Doba Shedo, She Sumba Ta, Shichin Login Zimba Gaja Sumba Tang, De Zongi Ranshin Yobala, Gaja Zimba Ni Yodo, Wen Chang Gaji Zowan Shima Yinde, Yujin Shichin Lo Dobala, De Zongi Yu Toma Gago So,
So now the refutation of objection says, someone thinks that animated woman is a woman, another another emanation stops these wrong conceptions. And this is like that. In this commentary on the refutation of the objection, he says, a woman emanated by some beings is empty of nature of being a woman, but someone else wrongly think this is ultimately a woman. Therefore, due to that wrong conception, attachment arises. The Tathagatas or Asharvakas of the Tathagata emanates another emanation, another emanations, and thereby stop the person's wrong conceptions. Similarly, by my words which are empty like an emanation, stop any apprehension that anything exists intrinsically. All things like the emanated woman are empty and do not intrinsically exist. Thus, he speaks of misconceptions as object of negation, and he also treats the intrinsic nature that they apprehend as an object of negation, making two kinds of objects to be negated. However, the primary object of negation is the letters. In order to stop an inaccurate consciousness, you must first refute the object which that consciousness apprehends. For instance, okay, which that
그러시 송소시 나도 되기 때문에 이게 제가 대령 가서 주발을 문에 짐바다 지바래 에세더라 가자 다니게 나오네 주발을 가자 짐바 주발을 문에 짐바 주발을 주바 많이 바셔봐 문에 짐바 지라 아니 맞추지 비가자 되로 어떨 때도 시진로겐 짐바를 가자 손바 당 대손비 장신 여발을 가자 짐바 니여스 면자 심마조 세디데레 베나가 저게 본바 장신 주ban 짐비 로코노 가자레다 아니 dentrigen zembege lote zo meba zo wala pumba demba jo meba che zo go ro as tenatesh.
So as we read earlier, that says thus the speak of misconception as an object of negation also treat the in intrinsic nature that they apprehend an object of negation object of negation is making two kinds of object of negation. However, the primary object of negation is a letter, what it says. It's now when we think of negating the vase as an existence of its own side, right? In order for the misconception of vase existing in and of itself, first we need to refute the intrinsic existence of the vase itself. By negating that vase intrinsicness of the vase, then one will be able to eradicate the misconception of the vase being intrinsically existence.
네. 콜로 가자 생각 가서는 로테 사트 조타는 무비네실에 도쇼지 조타는 제용으로.
So it is why it is called the object to be negated by reason is because one is superimposed on that particular object that doesn't exist as an existence.
그때 가르치는 제거에서는 그때 메시병원견 제거로.
Why this is happening is because due to the ignorance, without knowing how things really are.
가르치는 메시에서는 지디어로 까디어로 하세 디비.
Why we are not knowing is because we are obscured by ignorance.
텐트 체인데 그 나지 가자 데리피 가자 긴저도 따따 단징에 배치자 봐. 가는 뭐 가 동아세 본제 바다 아니 지다 텐트기로 신용수 좀 좀 나와니 나세 됐으면 무슨 조바데 추시데 라니라 지바데 여바체 근데 지바데 용하게 유급이네 습토모도네 아니 로바도 따바데라 아니 가지 지피 가자살아요.
So that's why I said it earlier example of object to be negated by reason and object to be negated by reason and object negated by the reasoning, and object negated by the path. One object of negation that exists, what it needs to be negated. One object of is that doesn't exist, but it needs to be negated. the sickness, someone who's undergoing sickness of jaundice, and the appearance of the yellow mountains or the conch shells.
这些特别这一下子操什么的，他们你这样点这些这下个样，然后我这那么电车你也嘛的，他们的电车节目的了样修路进着过，那的节目的了啥么也，偏拉出来的多，的，但的那把电车你了样我说，那公巴修那么是对谁了嘛是了的，多少钱的？
So next 2 weeks we will have no teachings, and I have some scheduled to go out, and then also I have to participate at the ceremony, the medicine Buddha ceremony by the Sarah May Monastery, where I'm participating.
我都想呢，他我从哪去的？他的干啥？他这个我们到外里头呢，刚刚刚才这些个的，搞眼刚洗完去，叫做一刚搞嘟嘟机在呢，那这几在那这边，那给月早啊，第一次被丢送到上边，那手机上家那就我们到电脑被叫啊，那可是嘛，讲说那个了啊，那电这机也拖了电呢，你让些事情汤几个就了，那我们到都比希腊送这那叫让进来见呢。那人保摩托吧，那送就多几钱以后，我就都淘宝修的，淘宝这样，那你吧，你这样，你手机上架那就新疆老多数哪把的，我们到我电脑不别个，你基本当把那就，你叫完了材料当街都，你结束中都是啥呢？你花钱的。
So let's do our dedication here. As we have discussed on the middle way or the Madhyamaka's view of ultimate nature of reality, I have tried my best to explain as I to my best knowledge, and you are also participated and paid a close attention to that teachings, and by this merits, the teachings that we discussed was such a vast, like an oceans, or as vast as oceans taught by the great teachers of the past. And it is due to the merit that we have accumulated. May oneself and all other sentient beings, before long, may they be able to attain, may they be able to have a correct understanding of emptiness, and be able to attain the enlightenment of unity of Vajradhara, in other words. And may all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the 10 directions please bless us to be able to do this. And furthermore, may all those great teachers of the Madhyamaka bless us to be able to have this view of emptiness in accordance with the Madhyamaka Parsangika.
老给今年撒币给我的，也当着我给了刚别当，且把就是老桑找不赢，天边年波人，日节爱说所就不知修学面都长，日少理解年的肩膀的，三千多面的面我。这个能到现了是不是？就跟到应到那么大，这面求见别让龙学见，撒当龙就应得绕做呢，多久将给过，人多也少也能够着。明天那个能养到阳明，天天人都别来做你呢。看到阳光刚西撒巴的，路面马的给动着我能，能真家也红包大酒钱，天马身边在老更多样，江边养着在外结束呢。 天边人马跟苍狼卷住，年年周边见那年些手，上个之间多边狼卷呢，手掌在边张月到根间，多月一节明白世间呢，家园灯把有人成就见，两把人间出个马家帮。乔家娘把这边说的呢，一节清白一让就把一，偏偏的是我写不说，世间家人民用真了呢，列住上就能就人别讲。他的那这一浪别的心，家园子把人都终究尽，拉上竹别天前出现金，夜间世界没当明明根，再绕更多家园我把眼，难道能当这我们就见，刚才天把叫了去学经。世间诸浪自把天元神，土地能就大度诸世间，抓些将士手，有就前就得了命过在了天津，能够成的手就接不到，老上天边正面撒中间，落叶面神道。念旧见，刚着长远过眼心光速，偏当天王毛里九月年，现人在望定人将作业，小别心天光，念旧见，将别不为接大千波当，更多上波天阳天间天。得到根觉结束道路是，给我得到当前绕度我对中西边叫我当前就，我刚了就多看不的，大千个月早晚的根将，从不学习绕度我就，哎呀，对不起。
도대체
嗯哼，我人家那不
Thank you,
是，
Nimala.
You're welcome.
Samchanango. Good night, everyone.
yeah.